And today, Ben will be talking about Skype vulnerabilities, zero-day exploitation, 2011. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. So, like she told it ago, my name is Benjamin, and today I want to talk about Skype exploitation out of the box. In the last half year, we have done a lot of research around Skype and the software, and we are actually discovering vulnerabilities and a lot of famous softwares. So I tried to exploit also the Skype software and could detect in 5 months about 6 vulnerabilities. Of these 6 vulnerabilities, 5 got verified by the Skype security team. And today I want to present 5 vulnerabilities, and based on these vulnerabilities, I also want to explain the attack schemes which are behind these specific attacks, to allow the people later to research about and exploit, and that you people could try to exploit it later on your own way, basing on the maps, which are, for example, server-side exploitation of Skype software. And yeah, now I want to start to make clean some questions, to answer some questions ago, because it's very important to know about before discussing about the attack schemes which we provide now. So how much attack schemes we will be discovered today? We will discover today about 6 attack schemes on Skype exploitation, and these 6 vulnerabilities are also based on different attack schemes, which we also will provide. Are the different schemes verified or tested? Of the 6 schemes we will discover today, about 5 got verified by the Skype security team based on the vulnerabilities we have released to them, because we do not full disclosure. How much are client-side, how much are server-side? So about 3 vulnerabilities are server-side located, and about 3 are client-side located. So half-half. Are the vulnerabilities OS independent? 3 of them are OS independent, means you could exploit them under Mac OS, under Linux, under Windows, but also 3 of the vulnerabilities are for specific OS. The severity of the vulnerabilities. The server-side vulnerabilities mostly between medium and high. The client-side vulnerabilities mostly on a lower level because of client-side exploitation, everybody knows that. Mostly we are more interested in discovering server-side vulnerabilities than in discovering, for example, the client-side vulnerability, because of the art of exploitation, because client-side exploitation is much more easier than to exploit it on the server side or on the software side. How much time that our group needs to exploit and identify? All the vulnerabilities got identified within about 4 months, 5 months. So not much time to exploit for me. But we tried it because a lot of people trying to discover vulnerabilities for Skype, but mostly the vulnerabilities are client-side located. So this time we will show the different attack schemes to explain how the attack really works. We will start with the client-side one. For example, if somebody is exploiting anybody else on Skype, and the client side is mostly an attack which could be sent over a message, for example, but needs user interaction because of the client side. Mostly client-side vulnerabilities are located in message boxes. For example, I'm sending another person a link which should be redirect him to Google, but if he's clicking on this link, it's not in a right way path, so you come, for example, to another external website. And this is client-side exploitation. For example, we show it in the model. An attacker is sending, for example, a link to he's connecting to the Skype in a conversation and is sending the other person a link. He's clicking on it with user interaction, and at the end, the non-persistent script code execution brings the person to, for example, an external website. This is the this is no advanced exploitation of Skype because client-side exploitation is not my personally target. So, one second. Okay, now I want to explain the first server-side bug. In the last months, a lot of press stuff is coming up because of one of the researchers from our lab, which is named Levin Kayan, alias Noptrix, has released a vulnerability inside of the profile area of the Skype software. He included, for example, a script code tag inside of the profile myphone input field, and later it's getting executed from the active user list. Means if I'm talking to a person very often, he's in my active user list. And out of this context, the script code is getting executed. Means if I'm including a script tag into my profile and talking to another person, it's hijacking the sessions, for example, on software side. So this vulnerability was with a higher priority. When it was released, a lot of people are coming to us and asking us, hey man, how you exploited it on server side. So this is a good one, but we have a second server-side vulnerability, which is much more interesting and tricky to exploit. For example, this one is coming from internally node because of the profile, which could be changed by the user and could be exploited on a remote way. For example, it could lead to session hijacking, execution of malicious content out of the context of the preview listing. And yeah, that's the vulnerability. Mostly people including it on a profile and exploiting their friends because they are mostly active in the list. So this vulnerability is also tricky to detect because you have to watch over the next function which is executing the code. So let's switch to the second server-side map. Second server-side map is much more difficult to exploit, like to include a script code tag on your profile. For example, I have searched in the software for a specific node. And when I registered the first time to the Skype Manager service, I tried to register with a script code tag as username. When I saw it's not working because of a specific restriction of the website, I'm looking into my Skype profile and canceled the service. And I got redisplayed a message with my username out of the Skype Manager service. And I tried to, for example, if you're registering with a script code tag, there's a restriction, but if you are logged into the Skype Manager, you could update the username. So I tried to include a script code tag and canceled the service, and the execution was in the status message bar of the Skype software. Means it's not like in a preview model, like in the other server-side, vulnerability. It's located directly in the status message bar of the software, which is not that funny because people could exploit that by inviting other persons, for example, to a specific Skype Manager conference, and this could lead to the execution of the specific script code inside of the software. This is also a very tricky bug to exploit because you have to research a lot to detect the vulnerability inside of the software. But I'm looking for a node. When I search around the software, I'm looking for a specific way to have an influence on this username. But when I tried to register on the Skype Manager service, I could not execute it. But when I was registered, I could update this username to to a specific script code, which could be, for example, it could be HTML, it could be also JavaScript. So it doesn't depend what you are including. It's just executing out of the status bar. And yeah. The third vulnerability is a transfer buffer overflow vulnerability. For example, if I'm unavailable, I couldn't receive any files. So I tried to start with a friend in conversation and was in an unavailable mode. So the download was in a query. So I changed to the unavailable mode where you mostly couldn't transfer the files, but you could accept them. I was switching out of this mode and going into the transfer mode of the software, and after that I switched in standby mode. After I switched back in my active system, I saw there some buffer overflow, which is affecting the end user, which is talking to me, but also my local system that's exploited by a buffer overflow. Means there's definitely a possibility to override something, but Skype has a lot of anti-debugging debugging protections, which they've allowed people which are not involved to to have an influence on the process by debugging it. In this scenario, we see I started up a conversation with a person, and both persons are connecting to Skype. And in this conversation, when the transfer happens, one of the persons need to go in standby mode with, for example, an x64-bit system of Windows, and then it's exploitable. The next vulnerability is memory corruption inside of the software. Skype has a dictionary finder where you could, for example, search other persons. When I saw these input fields to search other persons, I tried to include a very large string to check out if the software is parsing the inputs, but it has not parsed the inputs, so the software is going down, and the vulnerability at the end was verified for Mac OS and Windows. But it's not exploitable under Linux, to make it clear for everybody. Because not every vulnerability we want to release is, for example, OS independent. In this kind of way, both people are connecting to the Skype service, and the person which, this model is locally, it's not remote, means you could just exploit the memory corruption on your local system by your own. So it's a nice bug, but it's not remote. Now the denial of service. The denial of service was located in the status notification settings of the message bar. Means, for example, if you use the word Benjamin for getting and somebody writes you the word, you get notified by Skype. And when I checked out the input fields, I have included also a large string to check out if the software is parsing, for example, the large request. This vulnerability is local, exploitable, but when it's exploited, the people could also contact you and send you, for example, one character, and then the software is going completely down. Means the exploitation is locally, but after the local exploitation, it's possible to exploit it in a remote way. Yes. Next. So these are discovered vulnerabilities by me and my team. And now I will show some screenshots of the live exploitations out of these sessions to explain how the bugs are really working and where they are located. Let's go. For example, this is the vulnerability which has been detected by Levent Kayan, alias Nobtrix. He's from Germany, and he has discovered the vulnerability also on his website, but he discovered it over our vulnerability labs. So we tried to research around this bug, and the problem was that the input has not been restricted or validated or parsed. So the execution of the code will not be happening in the profile area, but in the active profile user listing. Means if somebody's in your active list and wants to try to exploit you, he could execute the script code out of the preview listing, which is been displayed on the main context of the software. Means you could, for example, hijack the accounts of the person or execute malicious code out of the software, which is very dangerous, because if you could execute script code out of the software, anything is possible inside. Also this one, this bug was completely OS independent. So you could exploit it under macOS, you could exploit it under Windows. It doesn't depend, because on every version of this software, the input fields are not passed anymore in the My Phone. So this was the area where I included the second script code execution when I was registering to the service. But I want to show I want to tell a difference between both bugs, because the profile vulnerability is coming from internally service to an internally service, because you're including it on your local profile, and the other vulnerability is coming from an inbound service, for example the Skype manager, and is also being displayed later on the execution in the status bar. But this bug is coming from an inbound model to the internally software. The other vulnerability is from intern to intern. So this is the area where I try to update the script code. And after the update, I canceled the service. And after I canceled the service, I got a message where my username got displayed in the status bar of Skype. So that's the location where the script code executions happens at the end. But to exploit this vulnerability, you need to invite another person to the Skype manager service. Means, for example, if I want to exploit somebody, I need to invite him later. But yeah, it's not that difficult to exploit. So at the end, the script code execution happens where the username gets displayed. Out of the context, you can see it where the text locate administrator have been removed out of the Skype manager, called blah blah blah. There's the username been displayed where a frame is getting executed out of the main context of the software. Means in my example, I included a frame to any website to show it's possible. But I also could include, for example, a malicious script code which is getting executed after you have invited a person over the Skype manager service. So this is the transfer. This is the transfer buffer overflow vulnerability. Where I had a conversation with my friend, and at first it shows me by transferring the file, it displays an app crash, for example. But this exception is not being handled because you could see it's a buffer overflow inside of the software, which is really tricky to exploit because of the specific status you need to exploit that. These are some exceptions we got in we catch with a debugger, which some access violations which happen on the exploitation. This was the vulnerability verified on macOS, the memory corruption, which is displaying an error on the macOS system after crashing the specific Skype service on it. This is also memory corruption, the same memory corruption, but we took a lot of pictures, so I want to explain and show how it's really working, so we also show this picture. Like you can see on this picture, we tried to send one char to the other person after trying to exploit the vulnerability. This is the Daniel of service one, and on this exploitation, on this session, we tried to send the other person one char to crash his client after the locally exploitation. So this is the memory corruption. Like you can see, it's an unknown error. And the input files of was or wo, this is in German. So this is the Skype dictionary finder where you could, for example, search specific persons. So I tried to include a very large string and saw if I'm including some spaces, I get an error which is unknown. So I tried to exploit this input field and found out, okay, there could something pass through. So I tried to exploit it, and at the end we could verify the Daniel of service for Linux, for Mac OS and Windows 7. This is this is the core exception and of the memory corruption. Like you can see here in the URL, it's requesting the Skype dictionary finder, and it's including the string what I have executed out of the input field. So the software is getting no response by the Skype service and is crashing as result. Yes, this is the memory corruption. Like you can see at the end, you get an out of memory exception, which is very funny because mostly you get not displayed this message. Also, the same exception under the Mac OS. This was a picture of a friend of me who has talked to me. Where this is a very funny story because a good friend of me has not updated his client, and I have tested it on my real account. So I exploited it out of the box. And when I have included the vulnerability inside of my specific profile, my friend's going online and got redirected to my website and told me, "Hey man, I got exploited by you." So I said him, that's no malicious code I've executed. It's just redirect to my website to show you what is possible. Yeah, and that's what we're talking about, mostly about the exploitation techniques, which are different inside of the, give me a second. Yep. So these are the exploitation techniques we want to present, and we have discovered all the vulnerabilities to the Skype security team, so they have enough time to fix it. Also, the manager staff, they remove the attack vector. So at the moment, the risk of the vulnerabilities we have been released are not exploitable at the moment. So we should recommend that because Skype wants that. Exactly this bug is very tricky to exploit because you including from an external service, you include external but inbound service which is displaying in the status bar message, and so you're including it over an update function. So the possibility to exploit this vulnerability is also working if you have the Facebook node inside of your software. So after I discovered the vulnerability, somebody's coming up to Skype and uploaded a video to YouTube where he's exploiting a Facebook vulnerability by displaying a message on his wall, which is getting executed out of the context of the software. And it's the same bug I discovered. But I have used the Skype Manager service to exploit it. The other person have chosen an externally node like Facebook, which also being displayed later in the status bar of the software. Because you also get a message, you can see it on the top that it's possible to include your Facebook account where it's displaying all updates for you. Okay. The vulnerability, which has been released by Levent-Kayan, was very special because 2 or 3 years ago, a person which is called Mr. Sauer from Skype has talked about vulnerability and Skype security, and mostly he said that the most vulnerabilities inside of the software are client-side. So we want to make clear we have discovered 2 server-side vulnerabilities inside of the software, which much more different to exploit than, for example, a client-side vulnerability, which for me not interesting anymore. The vulnerability which has been released by Levent-Kayan was very easy to exploit. It's a big difference between my vulnerability I've released in the software and Levent-Kayan's, because Levent-Kayan's vulnerability is an internal vulnerability in the software, and my vulnerability is coming from an inbound service to the internal service of the software, of the status bar message. Means if you know, for example, an active user, he could hijack you in 10 minutes. Because you could see the session cookie. If he's stealing the session cookie and the session have not expired, he could include it to steal your account over the website, for example. And the same is on the script code execution out of the software. most people think this is like cross-site scripting, but if I could inject JavaScript and stuff like that, it's not anymore funny, because I could include malicious stuff which could be used to exploit you or backdoor your software or stuff like that. It's very tricky to exploit this one, but it's not that high priority like the preview vulnerability, because it's easier to exploit. Okay. Here we see the vulnerable input fields where Levent-Kayan tried to include his script code, which later being executed out of the preview. You can see it also. He tried different attacks by changing his username, changing any input fields. Mostly the people which are discovering vulnerabilities are not that tricky in exploitation, because this vulnerability should be found some time ago, but nobody have checked the input fields and the active preview user listing. So it's very funny that somebody could find it in 10 minutes, and people are researching around the software daily or weekly or monthly to discover something. One second. I want to show also the Daniel of service map, which coming from a local attack to, give me a second. Yes, this one. To exploit this vulnerability, it's mostly, the vulnerability is getting exploited by a local user. Means, for example, if I'm including a large string on my notification settings, I could be exploited by other persons which are remotely connected to me in a conversation, and this person do not need to send me a large package or stuff like that. After the exploitation, the software is ever asking itself, is there any word inside which should notify this user? But if you're including a very large string, and it's every time if you send one chart, checking this one chart if the content of the large notification settings inside of that, the software is completely crashing. This vulnerability, after the local exploitation, this vulnerability is exploitable on remote, but it requires to get exploited on a local system or go. And so it's no remote vulnerability, it's local to remote exploitable. And that's a big difference, because the most people are looking for Daniel of service vulnerability, for example, by sending a large file or sending a large request or stuff like that. But if you're exploiting it locally, you could exploit it later on the remote way. Okay, let's switch back to the memory corruption. The memory corruption was located in the Skype dictionary finder. When I saw this function, I tried to include a large string and the software from the dictionary finder is getting no response to the software because of the large request. That's why it's crashing at the end with the memory corruption. This vulnerability was also been verified on the Linux, on the Windows, and on the Mac OS. So it's an OS independent vulnerability. Also like the both script code executions. When I saw my own vulnerabilities, for example, on different portals, they talked about HTML injection, but it's completely shit, because you could also include HTML text and JavaScript code, and that doesn't mean you just could inject HTML, for example, like a tag. It's completely crap, so don't care about that. Now I want to explain that again. The user, the attacker, is connecting to the Skype manager service, is canceling the service, and on this point it's exploitable. After he's sending the invite to the user, he could execute the script code out of the Skype manager conversation. But to exploit this vulnerability, it's required to add a person to your specific manager account. Means if I'm exploiting my local account, setting another user to execute the script code and adding the third person to the Skype manager service to exploit it. Yeah, and again, the persistent script code execution. The persistent script code execution of Levent-Kayan, he has included the stuff in the profile to exploit it, and we have produced a video about to show you all how it's really working. We released that video on, for example, Gully. It was also on Heise. It was also on Golem. And we also provide some other videos of exploitation. I have recorded 4, but I could just discover 3 of these videos. After this conference, there are, you could download them. Let's go back to the client-side vulnerability. Client-side vulnerability is mostly exploitable by sending another person a link, for example. And if I send my friend a link, which included in a script code tag, which is not passed by the Skype service, the person is seeing, for example, a URL which should bring you to Google, but redirects you after clicking on it to another website. This vulnerability is very nice, but Skype is mostly searching for more difficult vulnerabilities because these vulnerabilities are very easy to patch. Yeah? So the most vulnerabilities which have been released in the last years are client-side. That's why we want to make sure we could also exploit the software on server-side. Yeah. One second. Yeah, and this error is coming from the Mac OS system when we tried to exploit the memory corruption. It's displaying app crash report on the system, which is not being handled in any way. This vulnerability is just locally exploitable because of the reason that you are required to request this on a local system, because it is not possible that I'm talking to anybody and requesting it on a remote way, because it's a local function, but it's also locally exploitable to override a mem address, for example. Yeah. And also in this picture, you could see how we requested the service. It's the full URL of the service out of the Skype out-of-our debugger. This is immunity, and we try to catch the exception when it's executed in the large string. Here it's ending, but that's what's being displayed later in the debugger. But we have included a very large string to try to detect the buffer overflow. But I could just exploit it as memory corruption at the end. Because of different reasons. It's not that easy to discover vulnerabilities inside of Skype, because Skype is a software which has a lot of protections, like anti-debugging stuff, process injection protections, and it's very tricky to detect a vulnerability inside. That's why we don't see every week a vulnerability, for example, on exploit database or CDI or BCP program, something like that. And that's very funny, because I did it over 4 or 5 months. I discovered 6 vulnerabilities inside of the software. Of these 6 vulnerabilities, 5 are completely verified till now. This is a strange statistic because everybody is searching inside of this software. Also, the NSA is paying people for backdooring the software. So I asked myself why nobody could detect vulnerabilities inside when I tried it over 3 or 4 months and detecting over 6 vulnerabilities inside of the software. So if the NSA is paying me some millions for exploiting the software, okay, I'm a millionaire from today, you know? And yeah, it's very hard to detect the vulnerabilities inside of the software. That's why we needed the Skype security team to verify the specific vulnerabilities inside. Because when we started up a conversation with a developer which is named Yuri, he helped us to identify the specific vulnerabilities inside of the software. Without his help, it's not that easy to exploit them or to debug the software, because you cannot do that. You just can catch the exception, but you cannot exploit it. For example, in the last week, I tried to exploit the Windows, my Windows system with a buffer overflow, and I tried to inject into the process of Skype. And when I injected into the process of Skype, I got on my debugger a message which told me you have detected an integer overflow inside of the software. So when I saw this message, I contacted the developer and sent him my material. And at the end, we could verify this bug as not. The bug was not located in the Skype software. It was in my locally system, but because of the protection, it's showing me like it's an integer overflow, for example, because of dropping random messages. And this was really tricky because when I saw the debugger message, I thought, man, you have detected a buffer overflow inside of the software. But at the end, we could not verify this issue. Yeah. This was my presentation about the Skype vulnerabilities. If you want to talk later to me after this presentation, we could talk about it. It should be no problem. But on a specific base, because I could not release any stuff which is not verified. We want to try to release some other vulnerabilities inside of the software, but we cannot do that till the Skype security team have verified the issues. That's all. Thanks.